This young man was on a date with his girlfriend at a crowded party. When the romantic feelings were high, he suddenly felt dizzy and felt a thirst for blood. It seemed that something was controlling his mind, so the young man quickly left in a panic. When he got home, he rushed into the bathroom and poured water on himself to stay awake. It turned out that tonight was a full moon night, the moment when the werewolf completely lost control. Previously, when he went into the forest, the young man was bitten by a werewolf and was infected with the curse. Since then, his life took a turn that could not be reversed. That night, when this young man named Scott was taking a shower at home, suddenly his friend Styles came and said that his father, the town sheriff, had just received a call. He accidentally revealed that someone had found a body in the nearby forest. The strange thing was that the body was only half, the rest had disappeared. The police searched the whole forest, but still could not find the rest. Out of curiosity, Scott and Styles sneaked to the place where the body was found to see what happened. But as soon as they entered the forest, Styles was caught by his father, the sheriff. Scott, afraid of being called by his parents, hid behind a large tree and did not dare to show his face. He waited until the sheriff took Styles away before quietly returning. Suddenly, a long howl of a wild wolf rang out in the forest. Scott stood still in fear, his hands trembling, as he took out his asthma inhaler to calm down. Suddenly, a herd of deer rushed out and crashed into Scott, knocking the entire inhaler bottle away. The herd of deer trampled over him as if they were running away from something scary. As soon as he escaped, Scott found the other half of the body in front of him. He panicked and backed away, then fell into a small ditch. With difficulty, Scott got up and saw a black wolf staring at him from afar. Immediately after that, the wolf jumped up and bit, then dragged Scott a distance. When the wolf let go, he got up and ran out of the forest. At the edge of the forest, Scott was almost hit by a car while crossing the road. After making sure the wolf was not chasing him, he lifted his shirt above his waist, revealing a row of even teeth marks that were still bleeding. Scott's mind at that time did not understand what had just happened, but it was that terrifying encounter that changed his life. The next morning, Scott's body began to undergo strange and unusual changes. He could hear the phone ringing even from hundreds of meters away. Even a fastball thrown at high speed seemed to slow down in Scott's eyes. Noticing the difference, he told Styles about the wolf bite last night. Now Scott not only had sharp hearing but also superior speed. His sense of smell also became super sensitive. At first, Styles didn't believe it until Scott guessed the scent of candy in his pocket. Styles began to suspect, and Scott worried that he had a strange, infectious disease. He remembered a syndrome called lycanthropy that he had read about. This disease makes the sufferer believe that he is gradually turning into a wolf, but only on full moon nights. That night, Scott went to the pet store to work as usual. He went to the bathroom to check the wound and found that it was completely healed. Scott was surprised by this strange thing. He continued to the cat area in the store. As soon as he entered, the cats in the cages suddenly became aggressive. They kept growling and charging at the cage walls as if threatened by Scott's presence. He had to leave the room in a hurry, afraid of making the cats more agitated. At that moment, a girl knocked on the door of the pet store in a panic. It was Allison, Scott's classmate. While driving, she accidentally hit a dog, so she rushed here. Scott comforted Allison while checking the dog's wound. The dog was panicking, growling, and acting extremely aggressive. Scott just looked straight at it, and the dog immediately became docile. They both took it inside so the staff could treat and take care of its wound. After this incident, the relationship between Scott and Allison took a step forward. When Allison was about to leave, Scott mustered up the courage to invite her to a party on Friday night. Allison knew it was just an excuse to meet, but she still agreed. The next morning, Scott went to school as usual. On the day of the official team selection, the coach gave a spirited speech, and the players were all excited before the match. As soon as the match started, Scott was deliberately provoked and played dirty by a teammate. He tried to suppress his anger and counterattack with smooth moves. All the students in the stands were amazed by Scott's excellent performance. The coach immediately called him out and gave Scott a starting position. His classmates happily congratulated him, but Styles seemed pensive. He quickly went home and opened a book to look up information about werewolves. Styles discovered that the werewolf transformation process was exactly the same as Scott's condition. He immediately called Scott back to tell him all the results of the investigation, but Scott was only thinking about his date with Allison at that time. so he didn't care. When he was about to leave, Styles tried to hold Scott back because it was a full moon. According to ancient records, a full moon would trigger the werewolf's bloodlust. The change could be due to stress or anger or anything that made the heart beat faster, and no one had ever made Scott's heart beat faster than Allison. Styles asked him to cancel this date, even planning to call Allison instead of Scott. Scott panicked and immediately stopped Styles and pushed him against the wall. He raised his fist, but luckily held back. Scott finally knocked over the chair, apologized, and left the room. After Scott left, Styles saw 3 wolf-like scratches on the chair. Despite the warning, Scott still went to the date with Allison as planned. As the two began to get intimate, he suddenly felt a surge of bloodlust. In order not to hurt Allison, Scott forced himself to leave the party. As the moon rose, he gradually lost control. Scott saw everything became blurry. Relying on the remaining rationality, he got in the car and left the scene. During the party, a mysterious man appeared behind Allison. He introduced himself as Derek and said he was Scott's friend. When he got home, Scott rushed into the bathroom, trying to use cold water to stay awake, but the transformation became stronger and stronger. Scott's consciousness gradually took over. His fingernails grew rapidly. Sharp fangs grew in Scott's mouth. His pupils turned yellow, and his body began to change completely. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, interrupting the transformation. The person who came was Styles, who knew that Scott's body was changing and was worried and wanted to help him. Scott didn't let him in because he was afraid that he would hurt Allison. In the moment of losing control, Scott realized that the person who bit him was Derek. Derek was a werewolf, and the girl who died in the woods was also related to him. Styles told Scott that it was Derek who drove Allison away from the party. Knowing that Allison was with him, Scott immediately jumped out the window to chase after her. Under the moonlight, his body was completely exposed, and his wolf instinct took over Scott's consciousness. Thanks to his keen sense of smell, he quickly found Derek's car, but it was empty. Scott rushed into the dark woods, running fast thanks to his werewolf night vision. Scott discovered the jacket Allison wore at the party. While he was looking around, a dark figure suddenly pushed Scott to the ground. That person was Derek, who looked around and told him that he was too late. Derek said they were chasing them and they had to run. Before Scott could stand up, an arrow flew out and exploded right in front of him. The second arrow pinned his hand to the tree trunk. In his blurry vision, Scott saw 3 hunters step out from behind the tree. The leader ordered him to be captured alive. At the critical moment, Derek rushed out of the darkness and knocked down 2 hunters. Taking advantage of the leader's lack of vigilance, he took Scott and ran away. The 2 ran through the forest until they were completely safe. Derek told Scott who the other 3 were. They were werewolf hunters. For centuries, hunters have been chasing and destroying their species. Hearing this, Scott stood up angrily, blaming Derek for everything. But Derek thought it was good. He helped Scott gain extraordinary power. He now had super sensitive hearing, high speed, and vision like a predator. Scott strongly objected. Derek ignored the objections and said that if Scott wanted to control it, he needed him. From now on, they were like brothers with the same fate. The next morning, Scott went to Allison in an uneasy mood to apologize. He said he regretted leaving so suddenly last night. Allison was angry, but seeing Scott's sincerity, she forgave him. Just then, a man appeared in front of the school gate. Scott turned his head and immediately broke out in a sweat when he recognized that person. He was Chris, Allison's father, and the leader of the hunters. At that moment, Scott was completely stunned and couldn't believe it. The girl he loved was the daughter of the man who had been chasing him all night. Scott continued to practice football as usual, but when he was lightly bumped by his teammate, Scott's body immediately began to change. Styles panicked and helped him into the locker room to avoid being discovered. In his last moment of consciousness, Scott asked him to stay away from him. Just a few seconds later, he completely transformed into a wolf and lost control of his mind. His wild instincts took over, causing Scott to chase Styles like prey. In a moment of danger, Styles picked up a fire extinguisher and sprayed it directly on him. The white powder made Scott dizzy and he slowly regained control. After that, he had no memory of what had just happened. Styles realized that anger was the trigger for the transformation. As long as his heart rate increased, Scott could turn into a wolf at any moment. Since hockey is a competitive sport, Styles advised him to sit out the game. That was the only way to ensure that Scott wouldn't hurt anyone else during Saturday's game. That night, while Scott was on a video call with Styles, Derek suddenly appeared behind him. Before he could react, Derek angrily pushed him against the wall. He said that Scott had transformed in front of everyone at practice, dangerous. If they found out what he was, they would know who Derek. At that time, not only the hunters, but also the whole town could be chasing the two. Scott panicked and assured that no one saw anything and no one would see anything in the future. Derek coldly warned that if Scott played on Saturday, Derek would personally kill him. The next morning, Scott went to the coach to ask to withdraw from the game. He intended to use the excuse that he was easily out of control and had a tendency to attack. However, the coach said that it was necessary in the game. He believed that hockey needed strength and determination to win. Without letting Scott say anything more, the coach immediately refused his request. As soon as he left the classroom, Scott received a text message from his mother that she would take a day off to cheer. At the same time, Allison also came to say that she would definitely come to watch the game, and then the two could go out together. Hearing these words, Scott was stunned and didn't know what to do, because on one side was Derek's threat and on the other side was the expectation from his family. Scott then rode his bike to the woods and found Derek at the abandoned house. He wanted to know the real reason why Derek didn't let him play. He said that if he went out, the hysterical emotions would cause Scott to transform in front of the crowd. His mother, friends, and everyone would see the terrifying truth. Scott's current life would collapse in that moment. As soon as he finished speaking, Derek disappeared into the woods. When Scott was about to leave, he suddenly smelled blood in the nearby pile of dirt. Scott felt like there was something buried underneath this place. When they got home, Scott immediately called Stiles to tell them what they had discovered. They both guessed that the buried thing might be the remains of the girl's body. If that was the case, they could ask Stiles's father to investigate. That night, Scott sneaked into the town hospital morgue. There he found the remains of the body being kept in cold storage. With his werewolf sense of smell, Scott identified the smell of the body as the same as the pile of dirt. That night, Derek drove away from the abandoned house, and Stiles and Scott brought their tools and dug that night. They soon found a large sack tied tightly with rope. When they opened it, they jumped back in horror, because inside was the head of a wolf. Just as the two were about to pick up the wolf head, Stiles suddenly saw the aconite plant planted on the grave. According to records, the aconite plant could weaken the werewolf's strength. He curiously pulled up the plant and found a rope tied to its roots. As he pulled the rope up, the ancient seal slowly disappeared one by one. The corpse that had just been the wolf head immediately turned back into a woman's form. The next morning, the two called the police to arrest Derek. But as they were about to drive away, Scott suddenly had difficulty breathing. He quickly opened Stiles's bag and found the rope with the aconite plant inside. Scott's eyes turned yellow. He asked Stiles to stop the car immediately. Stiles quickly threw his bag out, but when he turned around, Scott had disappeared. After transforming into a werewolf, Scott jumped onto Allison's roof at night. When he was about to get in the window, Allison pulled the curtains in time. The image of a ferocious werewolf reflected on the glass, making Scott sober up. Just as he was about to leave, a car rushed over and knocked Scott to the ground. The person who got out was Chris. At this time, Scott had already returned to human form in time to avoid suspicion, so he had to make an excuse to say hello to Allison. Seeing that his daughter was interested in Scott, Chris coldly said that he would attend the match. The next morning, Stiles went to see Scott to advise him before the game. He knew he couldn't stop Scott, so he just told him not to get angry on the field. Stiles told him not to think about Allison or her father, or it would be dangerous. While he was talking, he was silenced by Scott's cold gaze. Then they both went to the field with a feeling of pressure. Scott's mother, Allison's father, and son were also present at this important game. The game not only decided the winner or loser, but also affected Scott's life. If he turned into a wolf in the middle of the field, even if Derek didn't tear him apart, Chris could still kill Scott. To avoid losing control, he tried to restrain himself from taking the initiative to attack. However, things didn't go as planned. Captain Jackson ordered Scott not to pass the ball during the game. He even deliberately knocked him down when he fought for the ball. Scott wanted to stay calm. He wanted to end the game peacefully, but when he saw Allison cheering for someone else, his anger rose. The anger flared up, and the werewolf power gradually took over Scott's body. Thanks to his fierce demeanor, the opponents were scared and started passing the ball to him. In the stands, the coach was surprised because he thought the opponent was giving up the opportunity to score. Stiles, sitting next to him, could only silently watch Scott play. He continuously scored points while the audience cheered in excitement. From then on, Scott became a killer. No opponent dared to come near him. With the final decisive kick, Scott's team won a resounding victory. The whole stadium exploded with cheers and screams. Immediately after, Scott panicked and took off his gloves. His fingernails had turned into wolf claws. While everyone was celebrating, Scott ran straight into the locker room. Allison saw this and chased after him. At this moment, Scott saw himself in the mirror and panicked, completely losing control. He punched the mirror so hard that it shattered. When Allison found Scott, he had already returned to human form. Soon, the first date between Scott and Allison arrived. As they had become more intimate, Scott's body had begun to mutate out of control. He had known his consciousness was about to be taken over by his wolf instincts and had let out a warning roar. Scott had told Allison to run away immediately, but she had still tried to stay and check on him. When she had seen Scott's face transforming into a wolf's, Allison had backed away in fear. He had completely lost his mind and had let his werewolf instincts take over. Scott had pulled Allison to the back of the car, letting her struggle. Allison had tried to open the door to escape, but Scott had quickly held her tight. The next morning, Scott had told Stiles the whole story of the night before. It turned out to be just a dream, but it felt so real. Scott began to worry about his upcoming date with Allison. He was afraid that he would really lose control and hurt the person he loved. As the two were discussing whether to seek Derek's help, a school bus covered in blood suddenly appeared before them. It seemed that something serious had happened last night. Scott immediately returned to school to check on Allison. If what he saw in the dream was real, she might be in danger now. He couldn't bear it if something happened to Allison because of him. Just as Scott was about to transform out of worry, Allison suddenly appeared. Seeing that she was still safe and sound, he breathed a sigh of relief. However, the dent on the bus was real, which made Scott even more uneasy. During class, an ambulance came to take the bus driver to the hospital. The driver seemed to be in a state of shock and panic. Scott told Stiles that it was him. To verify that it was him, Scott secretly went to the hospital. When the driver saw his face, he immediately screamed and jumped up. The driver grabbed Scott's shirt as if he recognized him as the attacker. Fortunately, Scott's mother, who was on duty, intervened in time. Escaping the hospital, Scott went to Derek's old house to ask for clarification. He told Derek everything he saw in his dream last night. Scott was worried that he might have harmed innocent people when he transformed. He was also afraid of worse possibilities that could happen in the future. But Derek answered frankly yes, which made Scott extremely disappointed. Derek advised him to go back to the bus to check the scene carefully. Through smell and touch, Scott could recall memories of that night. Only then would he know what really happened. That night, Scott and Stiles went to the place where the bus was stored. As soon as Scott touched the car door, a memory appeared in his head. The deeper he went inside, the more memories rushed back violently. In it, he saw the injured driver and a black wolf claw appeared. Before he could see the owner clearly, the school security discovered them. Scott had no choice but to retreat. He quickly jumped over the fence to escape. The next day, Scott happily went on a date with Allison as promised before. Unexpectedly, the romantic date turned into an unwilling group date. Because Jackson and Lydia also came, they filled the air with the smell of gunpowder from Scott and Jackson. Elsewhere, Derek went to the hospital to visit the driver, hoping to ask for clues. But right after he left, the driver also breathed his last. Scott returned from the date to find Stiles waiting in the room. Stiles came to tell him that the driver had passed away in the hospital. Scott was angry, thinking that Derek was the one who caused it, so he immediately went to the old house to find him. Here, the two of them fought fiercely, and both turned into wolves. After a while of struggling, Derek used his strength to throw Scott away. The two returned to human form. Derek insisted that he did nothing. Scott did not believe it and reminded him that he had bitten him and changed his life. Derek suddenly said that the one who bit Scott was Alpha, not him. Alpha is a cruel and extremely dangerous wolf that is unpredictable. Derek needed Scott's help to destroy him before it was too late. One day, while chasing Alpha, Derek was shot off the roof. The shooter was Allison's Aunt Kate. They were both descendants of a hunter family. The bullet made by the hunter made the wound unable to heal itself. Derek looked at that, his bleeding arm, his eyes filled with panic. He walked to school. Derek intended to find Scott for help. He met Jackson and was about to ask for directions when he made a condition with Derek. Because Jackson suspected that Scott used some kind of drug from him, he could rampage on the football field. Derek only replied that it was anti-inflammatory medicine and turned away, but Jackson still followed him without letting go. Derek's wound was still bleeding non-stop. He intended to go find Scott himself, but was stopped by Jackson. Unable to bear it any longer, Derek transformed and used his claws to scratch Jackson's neck. That scratch accidentally created a brutal monster. After Derek left, he collapsed weakly in front of Stiles' car. At the same time, Scott also realized that he was about to lose control. The two hurriedly helped Derek into the car before he completely transformed. He told Scott the whole story of being shot. To treat him, they needed to find the used bullet to heal the wound. Scott told Stiles to take Derek to a safe place, and he went to Allison's house. Scott and Allison had made an appointment to study today. They had a good time together. Meanwhile, Stiles was driving with a helpless expression. He didn't want to be near Derek anymore because he was too scared. When he saw the blood on his hands, Styles immediately stopped the car in the middle of the road. Before Derek's nagging, he coldly ordered him to start the car. Otherwise, he would tear Styles's throat with his sharp teeth. At night, Scott still hadn't found the dangerous bullet. While he was having dinner with his family, Styles kept texting him to urge him. Scott made an excuse to make a phone call and quietly left the table. He sneaked into the tree room and found a black package under the bed. Inside the package were many types of bullets and a wooden box with a picture of aconite. There were also 2 rows of bullets in the box, one of which was missing. Scott realized that the missing bullet was the one that had shot Derek. Derek's wound was starting to rot. He wasn't sure if Scott could get the bullet back in time. To prevent the poison from spreading to his heart, Derek was going to cut off his own arm. When Styles was about to do it, Scott suddenly came back just in time. He panicked and asked what they were going to do and stopped their reckless action. Scott gave Derek the bullet, but before he could tell him how to use it, Derek was getting weaker and passed out, causing the bullet to fall into the sewer. Scott quickly lay down and reached out to grab the bullet. His fingers were still just centimeters away from the bullet. In the critical moment, Scott took a deep breath and activated his wolf claws. He used his long claws to successfully pick up the bullet in time. At the same time, Styles also punched hard, waking up Derek, who was lying unconscious. After taking the bullet, Derek bit the shell and poured out the substance inside. He used a lighter to light the medicine and applied it directly to the wound. The wound quickly healed, surprising Styles. Then he mentioned Jackson, who was scratched by Derek the day before. The next day, Jackson showed signs of exhaustion and pain in the wound. When he removed the bandage, his throat felt unusually suffocated. A wolf crawled out of his mouth, but luckily, it was just an illusion. Because Derek scratched Jackson while he was poisoned, he did not turn into a wolf. However, the wolf venom and the father and son poison changed Jackson's body. Elsewhere, Derek was exercising in an old house. Kate led 2 subordinates to suddenly storm the house. Although hunters were forbidden to hunt wolves indiscriminately, Kate did not care. Derek took advantage of the terrain and quickly knocked out the 2 subordinates. When he rushed at Kate, her whole body suddenly went limp to the ground. Facing the high-voltage electric whip in her hand, Derek could not resist. When Kate was about to shoot, he ran out the side door. Derek saw the occupied old house and felt indignant. Then he went to find his uncle, who was currently in a wheelchair. Derek was extremely confused because the house was occupied by hunters and the Alpha who killed his sister was still missing. He prayed that his uncle would wake up to help find Alpha. The uncle had been in a wheelchair for 6 years and was in a vegetative state. At the doctor's urging, Derek had to leave the room. At that moment, his uncle's finger suddenly moved slightly. As Derek was about to drive, a piece of paper suddenly appeared on the windshield. Apparently, someone had deliberately left a clue to guide him. According to the content of the paper, Derek went to the veterinarian Bitten to investigate. 3 months ago, he had found a dead deer in a deserted suburb. On the deer's body was a spiral symbol that only werewolves could recognize. Bitten seemed to understand something at that time and tried to cover up the incident. Derek began to suspect that he was an Alpha and wanted to verify his identity. He tied Bitten up and prepared to interrogate him to force him to tell the truth. At that moment, Scott appeared in time and stopped Derek from using violence on him. Derek explained that if the Alpha could control the wound, it would not heal. On the contrary, if he lost control, the wound would not heal on its own. Scott initially did not believe it. He thought Derek was just talking nonsense. After a while of arguing, Scott understood that he was suspecting Bitten was an Alpha. When Derek was about to take action, he immediately transformed to stop him. Seeing that Scott had already learned to control the transformation, Derek was extremely surprised. Unexpectedly, in just a few days, he had mastered the way to turn into a wolf. Scott warned that if Derek hit Bitten again, he would not be lenient. In order to protect Bitten, Scott thought of a way to win both sides. Because he had been bitten by an Alpha, there was a blood connection between them. Scott planned to use the school loudspeaker to make a wolf howl to attract them. As long as the Alpha was near, it would definitely appear. Derek stood outside waiting. He did not believe that Scott's howl could do anything. The initial howl sounded like a cat's meow, which disappointed Derek. But then Scott adjusted his voice and let out a very strong roar. The entire campus shook with the sound that reverberated throughout the space. That fierce howl was enough to attract everyone in the area. While the 3 were still arguing, Bitten in the car mysteriously disappeared. Derek immediately denied that he had done anything. A sudden roar rang out. Alpha appeared right behind Derek. It attacked suddenly, knocking him hard against the wall, and then disappeared immediately. Scott and Styles panicked and ran into the school. They knew that the front door could not stop the Alpha wolf. The 2 of them prepared to risk leaving by car, but an object flew over. It was Styles' car battery. Apparently, Alpha not only knew knew their location but could also read their minds. Right now, the only thing left for the two of them was the car that Derek drove earlier that was still usable. They needed to quickly get keys and leave. Suddenly, Scott heard footsteps. The two of them quickly hid in the closet next door. The sound of the door being turned echoed and a figure entered the classroom. It turned out to be a security guard patrolling the school grounds. Before they could explain, he chased Scott and Stiles out of the classroom. The next second, the guard's body was thrown face down into the classroom window. A scream echoed through the hallway as Alpha tore his body into pieces. Scott and Stiles panicked and ran to the back door to escape the school. But the back door was blocked by two trash cans, so they had to find another way. Alpha was standing on the roof and had discovered their location. Although the two tried to escape into the basement, Alpha was always nearby. At this time, Stiles thought of a way to distract the dangerous situation. He threw the key into the storage room to create a noise to attract attention. When the Alpha Wolf ran to check, Stiles and Scott immediately closed the door. The storage room was surrounded by thick walls, so Alpha could not get out for the time being. Seeing that he had temporarily controlled it, Stiles desperately climbed onto the table and crawled through the window. He also loudly mocked the Alpha Wolf because he thought it was locked up and could not escape. But just as he was satisfied, Stiles raised his head and was shocked to see the ceiling. Alpha had crawled onto the ceiling and escaped from above, making him panic. At the same time, Allison, Jackson, and Lydia also arrived at school according to Scott's text message. As Jackson entered the building, a black shadow nearly 2 meters tall appeared in front of him. Jackson called Scott's name, but the black shadow did not respond. Then it suddenly crawled away. In another area, Scott used his sensitive hearing to hear the voices of 3 people. He immediately called them to guide them to a safe point. When the group met in the lobby on the first floor, Scott realized that they had received his message. Knowing that the situation was very serious, his face also became tense. Before he could explain further, the Alpha Wolf found the group's location. They panicked and ran into the chemistry lab and used tables and chairs to block the door. However, the windows in the room were still not covered. Allison, Lydia, and Jackson still don't understand what's happening around them. They were chased by a terrifying creature. As soon as they entered the school, Allison asked Scott to explain clearly, but he couldn't tell the truth. The secret of being a werewolf definitely couldn't be revealed at this time. After thinking, Scott decided to blame Derek for everything. He said that Derek was the one who killed the guard and was involved in the murders. Scott also emphasized that he was here now and would most likely attack. In the end, the group agreed to escape through the back exit, but the door key was on the body of the guard earlier. The group decided to make explosives with chemicals in the lab. However, during the mixing process, Jackson secretly switched an important ingredient. After finishing, Scott decided to take the explosives out to fight alone. Just as he was about to leave, Allison grabbed his hand, not wanting Scott to leave the group. She thought he was trying to abandon everyone. Despite Allison's pleas, Scott still insisted on leaving to save the group. When he reached the hallway, he immediately saw the body of the guard lying there, no longer intact. The Alpha Wolf also quickly appeared, roaring and rushing to attack Scott. He threw the explosives at Alpha, but it was just a dud. Not only was Alpha not injured, but he was so angry that his roar echoed throughout the building. Everyone in the classroom heard the howl. Under the influence of that sound, the scar on Jackson's neck ached as if it was burning. Scott's body also began to change rapidly and gradually lost control of himself. In just a moment, he completely lost his mind and turned into a real werewolf. Under the influence of Alpha, Scott was now like an emotionless monster. In his eyes, there was only ferocity and the desire to kill. Thanks to his sensitive hearing, Scott determined the location of his friends in the classroom. He walked closer to the classroom door and began to insert the key, preparing to open the door. At that moment, Allison's voice rang out from inside the room. Her voice made Scott begin to recall the old memories between the two of them. As more images flooded back, he gradually regained a bit of his original consciousness. Scott finally regained control of his body and broke the key. At this time, the group of classmates also heard the noise coming from the door. Allison immediately thought of Scott, but the lock was jammed because the key was broken. As they were trying to break the door, the police siren rang out in the campus. The person who came was the sheriff, and Scott, who had just regained his sanity, gradually transformed back into a human. The police took everyone out, but Scott began to understand the Alpha's purpose. Locking everyone in the school was a carefully arranged initiation ritual. As soon as Scott turned into a werewolf, the command in his mind was to kill everyone. What was worse was that Scott actually intended to do so when he lost control. Although the danger had temporarily passed, Derek and the bodyguard's body had both disappeared. Bitten, who had been missing, suddenly appeared next to the police, who were very suspicious. After escaping, Allison Allison decided to break up with Scott and did not want to listen to an explanation. She was disappointed that Scott had lied from beginning to end. Since breaking up with Allison, his mood had become more explosive and out of control. That night, Scott drank with Stiles outside. Two strange, young men appeared. They saw the alcohol and immediately grabbed it and drank it. That made Scott angry. His eyes gradually turned yellow and his fingernails grew longer. One of the two men was scared because Scott looked so fierce. Stiles guessed that he might have lost control because of a broken heart, but Scott did not answer. Instead, he led Stiles away from there, smelling the scent of an alpha wolf. Soon after, the two other young men left the forest. One was about to light a cigarette when he disappeared in a flash. The other was also taken away before he could escape, and both died. The next morning, Scott felt a distinct change in his body. Every little sound was clearly heard by him, as if it was right next to his ears. Scott's eyes began to blur, and the test became confusing. He panicked and ran out of the classroom. Stiles immediately chased after his friend. He found Scott trying to calm down in the school bathroom. Ever since the alpha forced Scott to transform, his body no longer belonged to him. Any surrounding stimuli easily affected his emotions and behavior. Stiles guessed that maybe it was because tonight was a full moon night, so Scott was mentally unstable. He said he had thought of a way to keep everyone safe tonight. Stiles planned to use iron chains to tie Scott up to prevent him from transforming. At lunchtime, Allison sat and talked to Jackson in the cafeteria. Not only did he take the opportunity to touch Allison, he also constantly badmouthed Scott. Jackson said Scott deserved it. Scott heard all the insults clearly, and he was so angry that he banged his head against the wall. Meanwhile, the hunters began to plan to hunt down the werewolves. Chris had been on the move since Allison was attacked by the alpha wolf at school. The full moon is when werewolves are most likely to lose control and become the most brutal, so this is also the best time for them to hunt. Scott was in the locker room preparing for the team's practice match. Meanwhile, the coach suddenly announced an important news in the team meeting. Stiles was promoted from a reserve to a regular. The team was preparing to adopt a dual captain system to lead the team more effectively. Scott officially became the second captain. Although this was good news, he did not show any excitement or joy. At this time, Stiles suddenly asked Scott to help ask Lydia, Jackson's current girlfriend. He wanted to know if Lydia liked him because he had noticed her since high school. Because of their brotherly love, Scott immediately agreed. But what he didn't expect was that when Lydia entered the room, Scott didn't mention anything about Stiles. On the contrary, because he wanted to get back at Jackson, he took the initiative to kiss Lydia. When Stiles came to ask, Scott even lied that Lydia had feelings for him. The match started, and Scott entered the field with an unstable spirit. He knocked out two players, blocking his way, and even knocked down the opponent's goalkeeper. His teammates were scared and immediately returned to the locker room. Lydia then went to Jackson, but the smudged lipstick on her lips didn't escape his eyes. Jackson began to suspect, and the conversation reached Stiles' ears. He was stunned because he knew that Scott had just met Lydia alone. When night fell, to prevent Scott from transforming and causing danger, Stiles brought chains to his house, but Scott refused. He said that just locking the door and going to sleep was enough. Stiles was suspicious because Scott's eyes were fierce like a murderer at that time. He reassured him that he was fine and advised Stiles to leave this place first. Seeing Scott's abnormality, Stiles guessed that the reason was the influence of the full moon. He tricked Scott into thinking that he brought something good. When Scott went to check the backpack, Stiles quickly took out the handcuffs and locked him up. He wanted to protect Scott from harm. Stiles also vented his anger about Lydia. To tease him, he deliberately put a dog bowl on the floor. However, Scott seemed to have lost control. He had no sense of reason or shame. Scott also told the details of the kiss with Lydia, even describing the feeling at that time. Elsewhere, Allison accidentally met Jackson while walking in the supermarket. Jackson was buying a helmet. The two chatted and then got in the car to continue talking. Allison felt that recently everyone was hiding something behind her back. Besides Scott, Allison also suspected that her father was also keeping secrets. Scott had been struggling in the room. Stiles had sat outside, also suffering from the torment of locking him up. He hadn't wanted to see Scott suffer, but there had been no other way. The full moon had finally risen, making Scott unable to control himself anymore. He had completely transformed into a werewolf, losing all human reason. Not long after, the room had become unusually quiet, causing Stiles to check again. When he had opened the door, he had only seen a pair of bloody handcuffs on the floor. Scott had been in his werewolf form, running wildly in the forest. Thanks to his keen sense of smell, he had quickly found the location of Allison and Jackson. Scott's mind was now completely possessed by the wolf's instinct. The two were just chatting in the car, but in Scott's eyes, it was very different. With the bloodshot eyes of a werewolf, he saw that they were intimate and close. Too angry, fury, Scott jumped straight onto the roof of the car, preparing to attack both of them. But suddenly a black shadow rushed out, throwing Scott into the forest. When he raised his head, he realized that the person was Derek, who had been missing for a long time. After being seriously injured by Alpha, it took him a long time to recover. Scott had now lost all human reason. Derek had to use violence to wake him up. When he regained his senses, Scott was shocked and wondered what he had just done. Derek said that was what Alpha wanted to see. Derek then took Scott home. Scott was so tired of everything. He wanted to know if there was any way to become a normal person again. Derek said that the only way was to kill the wolf that bit Scott. That meant he had to find and destroy Alpha. Derek offered that if Scott helped him find Alpha, Derek would help him destroy it. On the other side of a small office, Harris was packing up to go home. He accidentally discovered a death list left on his desk. Harris's name appeared at the end of the list. He panicked and hid the paper, but the Alpha Wolf was already standing behind him. Harris was scared and begged for his life, but the other party was not moved. Just as Alpha was about to make a move, Derek appeared from outside. Although he successfully saved Harris, Alpha also took the opportunity to leave. Derek wanted to chase after him, but a group of police officers suddenly appeared. He was forced to give up the chase and quickly retreated before being caught. Not long after, the police discovered Derek's whereabouts at the scene of the incident. Since Scott blamed him for the attack at school, Derek was wanted nationwide. Now he had to escape not only the police, but also the werewolf hunter. With no way out, Derek hid in an abandoned factory, but was still discovered. The police released sniffer dogs to search, but only heard a loud roar. The two dogs were scared and turned back immediately. Derek was temporarily safe, but right when he was distracted, an arrow flew close to him. It was the hunter Riggins. From above, he continuously shot arrows at Derek. At that moment, a car rushed from afar and stopped right next to him. The driver was Scott. Derek quickly got in the car and the two sped away. Escaping the hunter, he immediately became angry with the two people in the car. Derek said that he had worked hard to find Alpha, but the police appeared to sabotage it. Stiles wanted to explain for his father, but was silenced by his cold gaze. But what made Derek even angrier was that Scott, the person he had trained, had now made him a wanted criminal across the country. After venting his anger, Derek calmly shared the important clue he had just found. The last time he spoke to his deceased sister was Laura. Laura had almost figured out the true identity of the Alpha Wolf. She told Derek two very important things. The first was to find a man named Harris, Scott and his group's chemistry teacher. The second was a picture of a four-legged beast. As soon as Scott saw the pattern, he immediately remembered Allison. He had seen her wearing a necklace with this pattern. In another development, Jackson went to the hospital for a checkup after Derek's scratch. Since the day he was injured, he had been having nightmares about a terrible fire. Jackson's body was also getting weaker due to lack of sleep. He suspected that everything was related to the wound. After the examination, the doctor did not say anything. He just picked up a pair of pliers from the medical tray next to him. The doctor asked Jackson to endure the pain to remove a branch of aconite root. Jackson was in so much pain that he passed out, and he even had hallucinations of Derek appearing. When he woke up, the pain in his neck was gone. The doctor reassured him that it was just a little bit of residual poison, and that there was no need to worry too much. The nightmare came from a small amount of aconite poison and could be cured with antibiotics. Unsettled, Jackson researched aconite and ancient legends on his own. The more he learned, the more shocked he became when he discovered the connection between the poison and werewolves. At the same time, Derek and Stiles were following clues about the Alpha Wolf's identity. They went to the hospital to meet Derek's uncle, Peter, who was in a vegetative state. Neither of them knew that Peter was the most ferocious Alpha Wolf in the Wolf clan. Even the nurse who had been taking care of him for the past 6 years was his first subordinate, Beta Wolf. In a moment of danger, Derek came and attacked Peter. He didn't expect that the person he had been searching for so hard was Peter. To avenge his dead sister, Derek threw punches at him, but he was completely outmatched by the Alpha's power. Peter easily controlled Derek with just one hand without using all his strength. He lifted Derek, who was gasping for breath, on the ground and explained why he had the power of an Alpha Wolf. Peter said that the fire in the past had completely destroyed his mind. During the 6 years of being bedridden, his cells gradually recovered. It wasn't until a few weeks ago that Peter regained consciousness that he accidentally absorbed the Alpha power. Although he killed Laura to complete the ritual, he was completely out of control. As Derek lay on the ground, Peter looked in the mirror at half of his burned face that had healed. He told Derek to trust him because they were blood relatives. In another development, Jackson met Scott at the football field. He used information about werewolves to threaten and force Scott to help him. Jackson made it clear that he wanted to have werewolf power. Knowing the danger, Scott intended to scare Jackson by telling him about the werewolf hunters. Unexpectedly, reality, he was not afraid at all, but even seemed interested and looking forward to it. Finally, Jackson gave Scott 3 days to fulfill his request. If he did not gain power by the time the time ran out, he would expose all the secrets. However, just as the football game was about to start, Kate in the stands discovered Jackson's wound. She asked if he could turn into a werewolf if he was scratched by a werewolf. The answer was that if the scratch was deep enough, it was entirely possible. Jackson was unlucky enough to be targeted by 2 veteran hunters before he could transform. Scott, who was on the field, heard the entire conversation between the two. He was shocked to learn that they suspected Jackson of being a werewolf. After the game ended smoothly, Jackson forced Scott to help him again. This time, he even dragged Allison into the game to threaten Scott. Jackson declared that if he didn't have the power in 3 days, he would take Allison away. Scott then sadly left the field and went straight to the locker room. But as soon as he arrived, Derek was already waiting, and Peter also walked out of the dark corner. When he saw the long-time plant standing in front of him, Scott was shocked to realize the truth. It turned out that Peter was the alpha werewolf who scratched him. Scott did not understand why Derek was with the person who killed his sister Laura. Derek explained that it was just an accident because Peter was unconscious at that time. Peter said that he just wanted to help Scott develop his potential. However, he did not agree because Peter had harmed the people around him to achieve his goal. He began to get angry, took out his claws and scratched Scott's neck. The alpha power entered his body, causing Scott's head to flash back to memories of the arson that year. He realized that all of Peter's victims had participated in the arson. Although he escaped, he was severely burned, and Peter had to lie in bed for 6 years before waking up. He had made an appointment to meet Laura, but his animalistic instincts made Peter kill her. In another development, Allison was sleeping when she suddenly woke up to discover that the gift Kate gave her had disappeared. She quietly went to the car to look for it and accidentally overheard the conversation between Kate and Chris. Kate wanted to tell Allison all the family secrets, but Chris objected. She accidentally saw Allison in the car. Kate deliberately left a bullet to lure her. The next day, Allison invited Lydia into the woods to test this special bullet. Unexpectedly, it actually exploded. This bullet was mainly used to deal with werewolves. When they were about to leave, Scott suddenly appeared. Allison reflexively pulled out her electric gun and shot him. Scott took the opportunity to return the necklace he had accidentally taken from her earlier. That night, Allison took the initiative to go to Scott's house to make up for it. At that time, his mother had an appointment to go out, accidentally leaving the two of them some private space. Unexpectedly, the person who made an appointment with Scott's mother was Peter. He said he just wanted to ask his mother out for a meal, but Scott knew that Peter was secretly threatening him, and Scott could only stand by and watch. Even though he was with Allison at home, he still felt uneasy and immediately ran to find his mother. Peter had intended to turn Scott's mother into a werewolf. Just as he was about to do it, Scott brought his support. Meanwhile, Derek went to Jackson and promised to help him gain werewolf powers. Derek took Jackson to an old house, but in reality, he just wanted to get rid of him. Only then did Jackson truly realize how terrifying werewolves were. When Derek was about to attack, Scott suddenly appeared. Both of them immediately transformed into wolves in front of Jackson. When Scott and Derek were about to fight, a series of arrows suddenly shot out. Scott was hit in the stomach, and Derek immediately used his body as bait to help him escape. At this time, Allison was at Scott's house when she received a text message from Kate asking her to go out to talk because Scott had not returned yet. Allison did not leave immediately. In the end, she decided not to wait any longer and left the house. At this time, Scott had escaped. He transformed back into a human with injuries all over his body and collapsed in the middle of the woods. When he woke up, Scott was lying in the veterinary clinic and was being treated by Dr. Bitten for antidotes. Meanwhile, Allison followed Kate to a secret room. Inside is Derek, chained up in his werewolf form. Kate tells Allison about the werewolf hunter's secret that has been passed down through generations. Their family has been hunting and killing werewolves for a long time. Werewolves have superior speed and extremely sharp senses, making them extremely dangerous when attacking. The recent murder was caused by werewolves, and there are currently 3 werewolves in this town. One is Derek, a younger beta werewolf, and a very brutal alpha. The alpha has superior strength and an extremely cunning and unpredictable mind. Kate deliberately tells everything because she wants Allison to help her find the remaining beta werewolf. After hearing this, Allison's mind had been in turmoil. She hadn't known who to believe. Allison had been torn between becoming a hunter like her father and Kate, or living as a normal student. In the end, Allison had chosen not to continue to run away when facing danger. Under her natural talent, her archery skills had been very good and surprisingly accurate. From that moment on, Allison had officially become a hunter. Elsewhere, Scott had woken woken up in the clinic when he had heard a knock on the door outside. When Dr. Bitten had been about to go check, he had stopped him because he had felt danger. Scott's werewolf sense of smell had been very strong. Bitten had just smiled and signaled him to rest assured before walking out. The person who had appeared at the door had been Peter, and he had come to take Scott away. Bitten calmly said that the clinic was closed. If there was anything, please come back another day. Peter said he just came to get back what belonged to him. Bitten calmly repeated that they were closed. Failing to achieve his goal, Peter tried to force Scott to leave, but when his hand touched the fence, he immediately pulled back in fear. It turned out that the fence around the clinic was made of dogwood, an ancient exorcism material. Peter immediately realized that Bitten was not an ordinary person. He angrily picked up a chair and threw it straight at Bitten, but Bitten stood still and did not dodge. The chair shattered right in front of Bitten, but he was still unharmed and did not even blink. Bitten clearly repeated the words, "We have closed the door." Peter knew that this time he had met someone he could not touch, so he had to leave. Before leaving, he turned back to tell Scott that he could hide here, but Allison was not so lucky. The next morning, Scott went to Jackson because the school was holding a prom tonight. Because of his poor performance, the coach banned Scott from attending the party. He wanted Jackson to go with Allison, both as her dance partner and protector. However, he was too shy. Jackson was afraid of being hurt, so he immediately refused the offer. Seeing this, Scott sadly chased after him. Then suddenly he turned into a werewolf to scare Jackson. Panicked, he immediately went to Allison and offered to pick her up. That night, Scott also secretly attended the school dance. He did not dare to appear in public, so he just stood and watched the dance from afar. While looking around, Scott suddenly saw Peter passing through the crowd. When he looked closely, Peter had disappeared. Scott tried to chase after him, but was caught by the coach. In a hurry, he quickly pulled a male student out to dance. The coach immediately avoided him for fear of being rumored to be gay. Thanks to that, Scott was able to stay at the dance properly and continued to dance with Allison. At the same time, Jackson staggered out to the parking lot. From the forest in front, a pair of bright red eyes suddenly appeared, scaring him. Jackson thought he had encountered the alpha wolf. He trembled as he walked towards the forest. Jackson knelt down and begged the alpha to bite him. But while he was still speaking, two figures with infrared lights came out. They were hunters, Kate and Chris. Under Chris's threat, Jackson had to tell everything he knew about werewolves. Thanks to that confession, Scott's werewolf identity was officially exposed. Meanwhile, Scott still didn't know anything and happily danced with Allison. After the prom, the two left the school together and went to a bus. Allison took the initiative to invite Scott to get on the bus to talk, but Scott hesitated because this scene was exactly like the nightmare he had seen. While Scott was hesitating, two cars suddenly drove up and surrounded the bus. The driver was Chris and the other hunters. Before they could react, the car crashed into Scott. Being attacked unexpectedly, he turned into a werewolf and jumped onto the roof of the car to escape. Scott helplessly ran through the dark forest. He knew that after his identity was revealed, Scott and Allison could no longer love each other. At the same time, Allison got off the bus, her heart also aching. It was difficult for Allison to meet someone she truly loved, but unexpectedly, her family was that person's sworn enemy. Elsewhere, Lydia was dancing with Styles when she discovered that Jackson had left the party, so she left the stage alone to look for him. When Lydia called Jackson's name, the lights in the yard suddenly turned on. Immediately after that, a man in a leather jacket appeared from the other side of the yard. Styles, as soon as he arrived, shouted loudly to warn Lydia to quickly run away from there. But when she saw the face of the person who came, Peter bared his sharp teeth and rushed towards Lydia. Immediately after that, she fell to the ground, covered in blood. Just as Peter was about to attack again, Styles ran over and knelt down, begging Peter to spare Lydia. He looked at the unconscious girl and coldly asked Styles to reveal Derek's whereabouts. If he didn't tell him, he would tear Lydia to pieces. Styles really didn't know where Derek was. Through Peter's threatening roar, he remembered that Scott's phone had also gone missing at the same time. Derek was captured by the hunters. Maybe he knew he was being captured, so he took Scott's phone. As long as the phone was still on, they could track Derek's location via GPS. Styles immediately told Jackson to take Lydia to the emergency room. He and Peter immediately went to find Derek's last location. Allison was taken home by her father. He was extremely angry when he learned that Kate had revealed all the secrets about werewolves to her. So Chris decided to let Kate take Allison out of town. As for Scott, after running away in the woods, he returned to the vet clinic alone. Scott sat silently in pain, knowing that he had lost Allison forever. He just wished he could return to being a normal person. Scott remembered what Derek had said: if he killed the alpha that bit him, he could return to being a normal person. To do that, Scott had to find Derek first and ask for his help. Then Scott climbed to the top of the mountain Bitten and let out a howl that echoed throughout the forest. The howl quickly reached Derek's ears, who was being held captive. Realizing that the signal was from Scott, he immediately roared in response. Following the direction of the sound, Scott transformed into a wolf and rushed towards it. At the same time, Stiles and Peter followed the phone's location signal to where Derek was being held. Peter heard Scott's howl to prevent Stiles from ruining his plan. Before leaving, Peter broke his car key. Stiles reluctantly returned to the hospital to visit Lydia, who was still in a coma. When he met his father, he blamed Derek for everything. Stiles asked the sheriff about the situation and was surprised to learn more about the fire. He said Derek had been investigating the fire for many years. The sheriff did not understand why Derek wanted to harm Lydia, because as far as he knew, the culprit was a woman in her 30s. That person wore a necklace with a four-legged animal that had absolutely nothing to do with Lydia. Hearing the description of the necklace, Stiles immediately thought of Allison's family. He quickly went to find Jackson to drive together to inform Scott of this truth. But before they could leave the hospital, they were stopped by Kate and a group of hunters. She wanted to use Stiles to lure Scott out and force Alpha to show up. Under Chris's rough questioning, Stiles was scared but determined not to reveal Scott's location. He even questioned Chris about the fire. Stiles accused them of violating the hunters' rules. Chris denied it, but he directly exposed Kate as the culprit. Elsewhere, Scott found the basement where Derek was being held. Derek was tied up and a hunter was guarding him with the intention of assaulting him. As soon as the stick was swung down, Derek suddenly held it with his bare hands. Scott also appeared from behind the hunter. It turned out that Derek had escaped a handcuff early. He did not resist because he was waiting for Scott to come. After defeating the hunter, Derek immediately asked Scott to untie him as soon as possible. He was worried that Kate could return at any time. Scott agreed, but he asked Derek to help him prevent Peter from taking revenge. Derek angrily objected because werewolves and hunters were sworn enemies. Because of a hopeless love, Scott wanted him to trade his life. Seeing Derek's stubbornness, he was forced to reveal the truth that Allison had said. It turned out that when Peter killed Laura to become Alpha, he was completely sober. Everything was meticulously planned by Peter, including the way he lured Laura to him with a whirlpool-shaped hybrid trap. Peter's nurse tricked her into coming there so that Peter could kill Laura and become the Alpha Wolf. This is why Derek had to help Scott, in exchange for him removing the last handcuff from Derek. Before he could finish speaking, Derek had already removed the remaining handcuff by force. Even though he didn't say anything, he had implicitly agreed to help Scott. But as soon as the two left the basement, an arrow suddenly hit Derek in the shoulder. It turned out that Kate didn't take Allison out of town, but took her to the hospital to visit Lydia. Kate persuaded Allison to stay and become a werewolf hunter. Now they went to the old house to kill all the werewolves. Just as Scott was about to react, another bright arrow was shot straight at him. Seeing Scott fall to the ground in pain, Derek gritted his teeth and broke the arrow on his body. He pulled Scott into the old house to hide, but both of their injuries were too severe. After running a few steps, they fell to the ground again. From afar, Kate and Allison also came. Scott backed away, trying to explain what had happened, but Allison no longer believed him. Kate stepped forward and shot Derek unconscious. Seeing Allison hesitate to do so, she angrily tried to take Scott down herself. Just then Chris arrived and ordered Kate to put down the gun. He sternly stated that he knew everything she had ever done. Kate argued that she was just following orders, but Chris insisted that no one had ordered the killing of innocent people. There were children in the house, and that child was completely human. Kate had pointed a gun at a 16-year-old child without any evidence. Chris raised his gun and asked her to immediately put down her weapon. Just as Kate was about to drop her gun, the door of the old house suddenly opened a small crack. Scott, who was lying on the ground, immediately smelled the scent of the Alpha Wolf. While everyone was still cautiously looking at the door, a dark shadow quickly appeared. Peter continuously rushed around them at great speed, causing everyone to fall to the ground. Only Kate remained standing, facing Peter. Peter looked straight at her, the person who had caused him pain for the past 6 years. Anger and hatred surged in Peter. He demanded that Kate pay the price. Allison saw Kate being dragged into the house and immediately chased after her to save her. When she arrived, Peter had already grabbed Kate's neck with his claws. He demanded that she apologize for her past crimes if she wanted to save Allison. Although she was reluctant, Kate was finally forced to apologize. However, Peter did not accept it. He coldly tore her throat. Seeing Kate fall in front of her, Allison was stunned on the spot. She could not believe what had just happened before her eyes. Just as Peter was about to attack again, Scott appeared in front of Allison. Derek also transformed and went to confront him to avenge his sister. The three werewolves rushed into battle right in the abandoned house. Peter, with the power of Alpha, easily overwhelmed overwhelmed the other two. Although Scott and Derek worked closely together, they still couldn't hurt him. Peter now completely revealed his true nature as a monster. He lifted Scott up like a child. Peter was about to finish him off with his sharp claws. Just then, Stiles and Jackson arrived in time. They threw a bottle of firebombs at the alpha wolf, but he caught the bomb. Seeing that, Scott picked up a bow and arrow on the ground and threw it at Allison. She immediately loaded the arrow, drew the bow, and shot the bomb in Peter's hand. The fire flared up fiercely, and his arm started to burn. Jackson also joined in and threw another bottle of firebombs at Peter. As the fire slowly died down, his charred flesh was revealed. Peter, once the strongest alpha wolf, was now a zombie. 6 years ago, the fire left him crippled, and it took him a long time to recover. But this time, the fire destroyed everything Peter had achieved. At that moment, Derek used his claws to cut his neck hard. The alpha power in Peter disappeared, and so Derek officially became the next alpha wolf. The movie ends here. Thank you for watching. Goodbye, and see you again.